Morning, everybody. Morning. We're really impressed. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. We hope that we are deserving of your attention. We can be both entertaining and informative for you this early in the morning on the fourth day of the convention. So, my name's Robert Reynolds. I'm the GPM for Azure Cost Management, also known as Cloudyn, as we bring it into Azure. On stage with me is Vitaly Tavor. He was the founder, or one of the founders, I should say, since Boris and a few other people might get upset if I called him the founder. But a founder and head of product at Cloudyn, and he's now my partner in crime as we bring Cloudyn into the Microsoft family and out as an Azure service to our customers. So.
And Robert nags me all the time that I'm coming with Cloudyn shirt yet, and not Microsoft.
It's true. He has refused to get the chip implant to date. So he may say things that you'd say, really, a Microsoft person would say that on stage? And I'll just say, yeah, that's the chip implant not taking effect yet. So, let's see.
Please.
So, I just want to start with kind of what we're doing with Cloudyn, why Microsoft thinks cost management is important, and how it kind of fits in with some of the other things we're doing in Azure security and management. As we've been out talking with our largest cloud customers, we've really found that there's a big unsolved problem right now. Even though there are different products in the marketplace that help with it, it's still kind of very much a real challenge for customers. And that is, how do they govern the cloud? Like when the cloud started, all these developer tools sprung up that help developers with the cloud. Now we're kind of in the phase where all of the operations tools have kind of adopted cloud, or at least the cloud-oriented ones. Some of the on-premise ones are still a bit challenged. The next thing is, how do we help people govern? How do we provide the set of tools that help people deal with the fact that as they and their companies adopt the cloud, that you go from that first project out in the cloud to tens of projects or hundreds of projects, teams working in the cloud. Dealing with millions and millions of cloud resources. Because once you get started with cloud resources, it's really easy to keep going. And then the complexity of, well, that project team started in AWS, and now we're investing and most of our teams are in Azure, but that other team went off and did Google this quarter. Like, how do you help them govern, how do you help them operate those environments? So from a Microsoft and Azure security and management perspective, we're working on a portfolio of services to deliver a complete solution for managing, securing, and governing clouds. We're absolutely focused on delivering the best solution for Azure with these services, but making sure that we can deal with hybrid scenarios and cross-cloud scenarios as well over time. For cost management, we fit into kind of the govern section here, and policy management is the sister service. So if you saw Azure Policy announced this week, Joe did a great session yesterday morning, I think in the same room. So how do you control and how do you have visibility around what's going on in the cloud? And cost is one of the key new performance and operational metrics for cloud. So the things that we're thinking about in the governance space, policy-based management. So this builds on the ARM capabilities that are already in Azure. Cost management and optimization, That's what we do. Resource visibility, how do you just quickly understand what's out and deployed in the cloud, and especially if you want to know like what's deployed and has an open firewall or has this particular configuration. So very quick resource availability. And then over time, subscription governance. So how do you automatically provision environments for teams or business units, depending on kind of what your subscription account model is, and do that in a way that is automatically set up with kind of all the governance controls around it and all of the enablement tools for those teams so that they can just get started. And they can do what they need to do to drive business value, but they do that within a governed environment. So as we can talk to a bunch of customers, we've kind of found these three key personas. And I'd love for you guys to give us feedback if you see other groups and roles that we need to pay attention to.
Or actually, how the audience is split between these three?
That's a good question, too. So first, how many of you guys are IT executives who are going to want the ROI out of the cloud and the visibility? Excellent. How many of you are on the finance teams? Yeah, we figured nobody sent their finance teams to...
Why would anybody in finance go to Ignite?
Or if they did come, we all know where they are. There's an Excel session we're competing with, and they're all in there. And then the project teams. These are the folks that are actually responsible for operations of resources and services being built on top of the cloud, right? And each of these is a critical component and a critical stakeholder of success in the cloud, and they have different concerns, right? The IT execs, well, actually, I should just ask you guys what you care about, but from what we've heard is it's really about the big kind of outcome and business return that you're getting from cloud. The finance teams, they really want more accountability. And why can't you just forecast what you're going to spend in the cloud next year? Like, it seems like a really simple exercise. Excel will do it for you. Why can't you be accurate with your forecasts? There's a lot of explaining we have to do to the finance teams. The project teams, well, we'll talk a little bit about how they think about cost later, but ultimately, their goal is to get as much done and as much business value delivered as quickly as possible within the budget that they've been given. But how do they understand those things? How do they maximize the impact that they can have on the business? So we saw these issues, talked to a lot of customers. A lot of customers gave feedback to us, gave feedback directly to Scott Guthrie, that this was a critical issue that we needed to solve. We looked at the market, and we looked at our build plan. That's what I owned prior to the acquisition. And we felt that the fastest way we could deliver a full, complete set of functional scenarios and value to you was to acquire Cloudyn.
Thanks, Microsoft.
Yeah. We can all join Vitaly in his villa in Israel. It helps customers monitor their cloud spend, report on it, and we'll go deep into all of these in demo. Drive organizational accountability, and then ultimately optimize and drive the efficiency of the use of their cloud in relation to costs.
So what we found very early in the journey, that when you deal with the cost, you cannot deal with dollars only. The cost is very tightly bound to utilization and the performance. These three metrics kind of always live together, and when you deal with the cost, you always need to take all of them into account. That's why when we look at what the cost management should do, the types of data it deals with is the billing, obviously, everything, what you're paying, but it also should deal with the usage, what kind of resources you're using to get this bill, what kind of performance and what kind of utilization you get for these resources. Because it's very easy to get over-provisioned in the cloud, you will see that, and it's always required to keep the costs in the check. Then there are additional items, objects for each resource that you need to collect in order to be able to break the cost correctly. That's the tags. That's the ownership items like users. That's the cost ownership like cost centers and so on. And finally, we need the pricing to manage it correctly. So Cloudyn, or cost management for Azure today, collects all this data, and then first of all, it calculates the costs, obviously. Then it runs all set of engines, optimization engines, cost allocation or chargeback engines, the resource optimization engines, and all that is done in order to provide you the cooked or ready data, so when the last layer, the reporting layer, when you go into the cost management, you see all of that at the tips of your fingers. So we have the role-based access control. We have the management of the account subscriptions and so on, the cloud credentials. Then you have your own feedback. You can affect the results of the engines, the customization. You will see the dashboards. You will see how the cost management deals with the reporting. And you will see how the report management deals with the proactive alerting, because in most cases, you do not want to log into this console. You want to know what's going on without that. And that's the proactive notifications. The very first item that we are going to deal with is the cost visibility. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the actual itemized cost reports. For one of our largest customers, this report is in the range of 15 billion line items.
And that's billions with a B.
15 billion line items is not something an average human being can process by himself. You obviously need automated tools for that. And you need a good ability to visualize that. You need a good ability to analyze that, to drill down, to find the root causes of the issues, of the cost spikes, and so on. And just viewing your main cost contributors in many cases may be surprising. We had a case when we started working with one retail company. We found, not a big one, we have found that, like first day in the monitoring, we have found that about 1/2 of their spend was contributed by only 5 servers, very expensive ones. And we showed them that, and we asked them, is it intentional? And they kind of scratched their heads. It was the remainders of the marketing campaign they were running like 3 months ago and forgot to turn the servers off. But since it was difficult to visualize what are the cost sources, so they kept them running and paying for them, obviously, for several months without doing anything.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is as cloud usage scales in your company, this becomes a non-human problem. A human being isn't going to scan and figure out 1 billion lines of cost codes, right? It starts taking machine help to help you quickly visualize and find places where you need to put the human effort, and to start analyzing the data automatically for you and then bringing your attention when you need to pay attention to it and where you need to pay attention to it. And that's kind of the core of what visibility does. So we're going to do demo. We promised demo heavy. I guarantee you we're going to be demo heavy. But what we're going to walk through is just kind of the basics of account management, like how do you connect to clouds to get the data, kind of what data sources are we collecting from the cloud APIs, what data types are we collecting from that, and then how that kind of gets pulled in, and then how it shows up kind of in dashboards and reports. So this is just kind of the straight through simple path on reporting and visibility.
So The cost management starts with the Azure Blade, where you have the cost management and billing. Inside the cost management and billing, there is a special cost management tab, and that's where you start your journey to the cost management.
So this is new as of Monday in the portal. Now, there's 3 scenarios we support when you click on that Go to Cloudyn.
We support the enterprise customers, though with EA credentials. I will not demo the specific experience of the onboarding, but the EA customers will have their special path. The CSP partners will have their special path, and the direct.
Yeah. And so the first thing we do is we look and see, is Cloudyn already configured for your company? If it isn't, we take you through those trial paths. If it is, and you're already configured for Cloudyn, then you will be taken single sign-on directly into the Cloudyn experience and get put into the dashboard experience, because that's the landing page when you log into Cloudyn. So no more credentials, single click, boom, you're over into product once things are set up. There is a third scenario from there, which is the admin has set up Cloudyn, but they have not granted access to the user. And in that, the user will get a message that says, a request has been sent to your Cloudyn admin requesting access. And then there'll be an email that we send to the Cloudyn admin with the credentials for that person so that they can properly be added to Cloudyn. Cloudyn today is a separate user and RBAC system. As we move into Azure, we'll bring those things much tighter into what you guys are familiar with AAD and Azure. But today, we've got single sign-on, and we basically notify the user that you haven't given them access yet. So.
Now, I'm not sure in Microsoft it's politically correct to talk about other clouds, but how many of the audience are using other clouds except of Azure? It's not like other, okay, thank you.
It's perfectly fine to talk about other clouds.
Thank you.
Actually, I'd love to understand, like, in the audience, and there won't be any punishments later, just so we're clear, how many people are using AWS? Okay, maybe half, a little bit more than half, maybe. How many people are using Google?
Not altogether.
Yeah. Google Cloud. Sorry, not Google Search. How many people are using SoftLayer? Our 2 friends back there. We don't support you guys yet on that scenario, but.
Anybody using AliCloud?
AliCloud in China? Yeah, got 1. Okay. Oracle Cloud? Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
So when you go through the registration experience, you provide the first set of credentials. But to connect to all of your cloud resources, you need to configure the cost management to be able to collect data from all of these. So we have Microsoft Azure accounts, and in Microsoft Azure, we have the either enterprise or CSP. And you cannot at one level have everything, but you can have all of them within the cost management and have the unified view. For AWS, you may have, you add your accounts by creating a role, special role for cost collection or billing collection. In Google, it's a very similar process to Microsoft, where you give your consent to collect the data. And that's the sources, that's how the cost management collects data from different clouds. Then the cost management, the visibility of cost management is centered around the dashboards and the reports. When you look at each report, you can have multiple presentations. You can have the bars, lines, whatever, the standard presentation types of the reports. And then you have the notion of groups and the notion of filters. So for example, this is the Azure spend, daily resolution, 1 month, right? And there is this nice spike here, which people typically like to know why this spike happened, right? So
we were preparing for a demo?
No, of course not. It's completely authentic. So to find what the spike is, we use groups and filters to find it out. So for example, let's group by services and see which service created this spike. Okay, we see that the spike is due to Azure VMs. Unsurprising, because Azure VMs is a very significant part of the usual spend. So now we zoom in a specific one, just the VMs. And we'll try to understand what this spike of VMs is. So let's add the resource type to the blend to understand which types of resources created this spike. So we see that the spike is due to two resources, the standard DSv2, and there is some smaller chunk, which is a DS64. Then you have the cost.
Those are awesome VMs, by the way.
Very good ones. Developers love these VMs, I promise you. So, and the next step is to go to Instance or Resource Explorer, and I have filtered already by this VM, by DS15, to have a look what these are. And in this particular case, it happens to be the load test VM. And it's already stopped, so the spike ended. Somebody ran the load test, so this is a legitimate spike. But we have seen enough cases of illegitimate spikes which do not go down. And that's exactly the way to analyze that. And that's where visibility helps you to understand what your cost spenders or what your cost contributors are. The second type of view is the dashboard, which consists of reports. You can use the canned dashboards, or you configure your own ones. This is one of the custom dashboards that we have created in the product when the wheel stops turning. Thank you, Will.
We have more wheels.
Yeah. And you can bring all the data that you need immediately when you just log into the tool, and you see what you need to see immediately without a need to go through all of the reports. Right? This is kind of the examples of what the visibility can do. And this is just a small example. Obviously, the cost management allows you much granular control over it.
Yeah, and both reports and dashboards are customizable.
And everything is customized.
Great.
It's your...
Then you need to switch that.
Yes, I need to switch you. Okay, so I assume that most of the audience has read The Hitchhikers, right? There is a very, very well-known notion there of SEP, somebody else's problem. In Hitchhikers, it was used to hide a spaceship. In the cloud, the SEP, somebody else's problem, is used to hide the costs. Everybody used to think that costs are somebody else's problem. I'm just creating resources, but somebody else will take care of. Well, there is a surprise. Somebody else is you. I mean, everybody in a cloud should care for cost. Cost is an operational metric, a very important one. And that's why cost is not somebody else's problem.
I really care about costs, said no developer ever. This is why accountability and helping them understand that this is a new operational metric. Developers care a lot about performance and availability because they know that the business expects them to worry about that, and it provides tools for them to measure those things for their application services and to improve those things, right? In the cloud, cost is a new operational metric that's just as important and just as real-time as performance and availability have been traditionally on-premise. So the keys to gaining accountability or distributing accountability and providing governance is to extend visibility to the stakeholders. Actually have those teams have an experience. Like, in the long run, what this is going to mean in Azure as an application team is running their application in Azure, we'll provide a cost summary right there in the portal, right next to where they're operating their resources, so that they always kind of understand the cost envelope that they're running in, the budget, and what their consumption is and how that is going against the budgets that they've been given. Today, what that means is going into Cloudyn and being able to see that. And we'll talk about how you set that up. So the first item is just make them aware. Give them the visibility. It's funny when somebody is just spinning up resources, but then all of a sudden they realize that, well, that one costs $5,000 a day. That they actually start having some self-control on resources. Because there is real, it's not like people aren't sensitive to cost. It's that in the past, the budget was an annual thing that everybody else took care of, that SEP effect, right? And so, and really a lot of the actions that the developer took really weren't big daily cost changers. In the data center, the iron was bought. It was a finance problem at that point, right? The application software was bought. The developer had their tools. They did their stuff. They didn't completely change the architecture every day that made a repurchase of all the hardware in the data center, right? They can do that in the cloud, and that's great because they can change their architecture so that it's cheaper. They can change their architecture so it scales and delivers more business value. But we have to give them the visibility and the awareness of the cost attribute. Then fundamentally, accountability is an organizational thing, right? We can help, but then the organization needs to start holding them accountable for understanding their costs, for optimizing their costs. Budgets help. Annual budgets, by the way, are great. They're really easy to negotiate and have the leadership sign off on. Not all that helpful to a developer who needs to make decisions every day about what they're deploying in the cloud. So being able to take an annual budget, give them a monthly budget, right? So that they can start thinking in much more tighter decision windows. Don't give them a, here's your annual budget. Hey, I'll tell you when you're 75% done with it in February, right? Break it up into smaller monthly budgets, give them those kind of budgets, and then allow them to manage against that style of budget. Because they can actually make changes that will affect a monthly outcome. And that'll give them enough ramp warning so that they can actually change things and produce the proper outcome, which is great business value under budget. And so it is an organizational thing. You have to challenge them to get better. A lot of folks, like if you talk to the MSIT guys, they've migrated huge amounts of the Microsoft internal systems onto Azure. And they went through all of this learning too. They actually have dashboards that kind of gamify the system. And as we've talked to them, they really want really tight latency between the developer taking an action and it showing up on the dashboard. Because they want the developer to be able to look in the morning at the dashboard, see that there's a cost spike happening, go make a change in the system, and in the afternoon, see that that cost spike is starting to come down. Because when that feedback comes for the developer, and they understand that the changes that they're making affect the outcome, they actually start doing it more. And so it's really important organizationally to give them the visibility and then start placing the expectation, give them the tools and place the expectation on outcomes. Tagging. We skip over this a lot, but it's really important. So it's how we take cloud resources and map them in the system as data around costs and budgets and things like this. Now, tags should be enforced by configuration policy, whatever cloud you're in. AWS has ways to do this. ARM has ways to do this. As part of the Azure policy announcements this week, they've added the ability to set up initiatives, which are sets of policies that you can set up for tagging, so that on any subscription, you can say this cost center must be applied, or a cost center tag must be present on any resource or it can't be created. Or here's the default value, but it can be overridden by the developer, but there must be a cost center for all resources. This really starts enabling good data to flow into the system so that you can understand who the owner is. Like, who is the responsible person, not team or group or whatever, but when there is a cost issue with that environment or that resource, who is the person that can be contacted to make sure it gets addressed? What are the cost codes? Like, tying this back to the finance systems. You guys all have finance systems. Finance has all these cost codes, has all this organizational structure in it. Tagging is a way to make sure that the resource and the information that we have about the resources can be correlated to those finance systems.
But by the way, out of the audience, who is under enterprise agreement? Most of the audience. And direct?
How about CSP? Okay.
So in the EA, as you know, cost center is part of the configuration that you can make in EA portal, right? So why is it so important to also have the cost information, like cost center, as a tag on the resource, if you already have that at the top level? Any ideas? First, not anyone can see the top level. And second, if you use the cost center of the enterprise agreement, then you are bound to have the cost center as granular as subscription. You cannot go below the subscription in granularity. If you are a large organization, your number of subscriptions may grow uncontrollably. When you are above several hundred subscriptions, it's very difficult to manage. So at some point, you will have to combine cost centers within the single subscription. And then you need to tag. And then that's exactly when you need the policies. And that's exactly when you need the tags. So you can be much more granular than just the structure that you have now.
An easy one for me is, even if you give each project team their own code. At Microsoft, every service team has their own subscriptions, right? But we have to tag everything with, is this a running instance that's delivering the service for the customer, AKA a COGS, cost of goods sold, from an accounting perspective? Or is that an R&D resource that we're using for development and test, right? And just there, every team is going to have two categories, two cost centers that our resources get mapped to, right? Purpose information. Environment, what application service is this deploying? We're actually working on ways to make the modeling or the tagging of application services so that you can see those more easily. But you guys can do it today with tags and environment. Is this a dev test resource? Is it a production resource? Now, these are really powerful things when it comes to cost management, but in general, this is tagging is mandatory for better governance, let alone cost accountability, right? And so thinking about what your tagging policies are and making sure that your governance metadata is actually landing and enforced on the resources is an important thing to do. Now, what happens if you've already deployed 10,000 resources and nobody paid attention to that?
And obviously, everybody tags all the resources, right?
Correct. You guys are all good on this already. So what cost management does is, as it collects the data, it can, first, it will go discover the resource groups in Azure. And whatever tags you have on resource groups, it'll automatically apply and associate with the resources that are contained within that resource group. So this is a relatively simple way to go mass tag. Now, you can also do that with policy now, but not all clouds have that same function and that same ability. The next thing is, as the data comes in, it can look at what tags are there. It can help you rewrite them so that they're standardized. Like, is production with a capital P, a lowercase p, or is it just prod? Like, your devs might have put any of those things in. Or that might have been the standard 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, right? And what Cloudyn will do is it'll allow you to take those, normalize them, and say, we want all of those normalized to capital P production because that's our new standard and that's what all the reporting is going to be based off of. And then it'll also allow you to take and say, well, I want to look at production and cost code. So whenever I see a production environment tag and I see cost code X, I want to create yet another tag that is this value. So I know that that's this team. And now I want to organize that. So that's what, when we say a meta tag, we're creating that after the fact. It didn't get put on the resource, but we're looking at resource information and tags and then allowing you to put that tag virtually into the data.
Yeah, for example, many start with naming conventions. Those who are new to the cloud, they start with good naming, and the name reflects lots of purposes of the resource. It reflects all of this information.
That worked perfectly well for 30 years on-prem.
Exactly. And when you are in the cloud, you actually want to break it down. So the category manager allows you to take the name and create multiple categories out of it, the category of the environment, the category of the cost, and so on.
Yeah. So what Vitaly is going to take us through in the demo around accountability is we're going to start with, you might have noticed when we're talking about bringing data in from the clouds, there was an entity hierarchy over on the right. The right. Anyway.
This right.
You're right. I meant to do that. That's a really important thing because that allows you to actually model your organizational hierarchy, your finance hierarchy, and map the data to. So we're going to start there. The other thing that gets bound to that hierarchy is RBAC. So I can give a development team a view of only their cost-related data. They can't see the enterprise data, but my finance guys can have access to the entire enterprise and be able to see all the application team's data, regardless of cloud or subscription or whatever. And then talk about cost allocation. How do you bring the costs in? How do you start spreading them out across that entity hierarchy? How do you spread them out across orgs? What if you don't want your end users to see your actual cloud costs? What if you want to present a different cost to them? What if you're doing value-added services for them and you want to add that into the cost that they see? It's a common CSP scenario. It's also a very common enterprise scenario, as we've talked to enterprises, is that the central teams are doing value-added services, and so they provide a markup that they present as part of the bill of IT. Right? And then the other thing we'll take you through is, well, let's look at budgets. How do you set up a budget against that organizational entity? How do you...
Isn't it somebody else's problem?
No, this is, well, probably in this room it might be, because it's probably the finances guy's problem. But you can import, we actually have this spreadsheet that you can export, you can give to finance. They can put all the budgets in, and then you can bring it back in. Budgets, how do you set up a budget? And then how do you start allowing people to get notifications against the forecast of their usage against the budget? Right? Because that's what's important. When you've overspent your budget, it's a little late for us to raise our hand and go, hey, you blew past your budget last week, right? You want to know, hey, it's the second week of the month, and you're already forecast to be over budget at the end of the month by 20%. Like, that's an actionable thing, right? And so we'll take you through that. Go ahead. It's all you, man.
So as Robert mentioned, here's the account tree that we have shown. Actually, these are the accounts that the system automatically discovers when you give it the access to the billing or to the usage. Then you can, on this right, define your own enterprise structure. In this case, I have defined 3 items. That's why in the first dashboard, those with the sharp eyes will remember 3 entities. There is engineering, there is IT, and there is marketing. Now I can create another one.
Oh. Do you have to zoom it?
I can try.
Yeah.
Now it's okay? So we'll create a new one, and we'll call it sales. Now, here I'm also creating within the cost management its own user. Eventually it will move to Active Directory of Azure, but now you have to create a user along with the entity that you create. And this user will have access just to this entity and will see just his own parts of the cost. That's the part of the RBAC that we're talking about. Now you give the access level. You can say this is enterprise with cost allocation, or you can say this is enterprise, but the cost is based on the cost allocation of the parent.
So that email, that account would be the first administrator
That's
for this entity.
That's the first administrator, that's right. And that's what Robert mentioned, that if the children should not see the original cost, the children should just see the marked up cost of the parent. That's your way to do that. We'll give the enterprise plus cost allocation, so it will be able to define its own cost allocation policies. So we have created these sales. And now you can drag the cloud resources onto specific entities. For example, you can drag this account to any one of the entities. That way you assign the resources to particular tree levels and effectively enforce the RBAC to people who will be accessing the system.
And that's RBAC for the data, which at this point isn't connected to the RBAC in Azure or AWS for the resources themselves. As we integrate with Azure, you'll be able to set roles on the resources themselves that'll get inherited.
Okay. Next, once you have the RBAC system, this is small, I'm sorry, but I'll try to make it larger. Then when you define your cost allocation policy, and we'll see what cost allocation policy is. This is an example how you break the cost by various
so what are the different
sources.
What are the different levels in the rings here?
So here's the level of a specific unit, which is called Contoso.
So that's the entire company.
That's the entire company in this case. Here's the level of the workload type. Can you see the text, or is it too small? Let's make it a bit larger. Then I will need to scroll it somehow. So next is the level of workload type. You see the production, you see the development, and so on, right? Within the workload type, you can see the actual components, which are the database, slaves, and so on. And then the usage types, which is the multi-cloud taxonomy that we have defined, where it shows that the DB slave, database slave within the production is using this much of storage. And you see here the immediate cost impact. This much of instances, this much of whatever. This is a different component.
So right? This was a view through the entire organization of what environment, what application, and what the underlying cloud contributors to cost were.
Now, this is one type of structure. Suppose you would be interested, instead of seeing the applications within the environment, you would like to see actually what environments are within the application. So you regroup. I'm not sure how it works with the zoom. It doesn't like the zoom. You will believe me that. So I have regrouped, right? And now I see different levels. So instead of seeing the applications within the environments, now I can see the application, which is DB slave, and I see what components are production, what components are development, and so on, right? Now, every report within the cost management, you can make several things with it. You can, first of all, you can save it into favorites. You can export it, or you can present it in a different way. You can present it, let's say, as a table. And then as a table, this is directly exportable into the chargeback system. So instead of doing all the manual work, you can take this directly as it is and import it into your SAP or whatever you're using for internal chargeback. Now, you can make sure that it is scheduled, and you can either send it by email or save it to some storage. When you send it by email or save it into storage, you can also take the threshold. For example, you have defined a subset, you have defined a filter on the cost allocation, and you would like to have an alert when this specific filter crosses a specific threshold. So you define here the red alert when this specific item crosses $1,000, and on a report, you have an effective alert which tells you that something went wrong or something is not as expected, right? Now, how this cost allocation magic work and how the cost allocation was able to define this specific cost components like the workload type component and so on. So all this is based on the cost allocation policies. Why do you need policies? Because different teams may want to break the cost down by different criteria or different means. So the policy defines you how you would like to break the cost down. And the first thing that you do when you define a policy, you define the cost sources. You may take your entire cloud spend, or you may take just portions of it and say this policy deals just with the Azure spend, or this policy deals with just the specific department. Then you define your categories. Categories are another word for tags. The tags that we have selected for policy are cost center, component, and the workload type. You have seen the workload type and the component within the demo. And there is another one, cost center, which is less interesting. That's why I did not show it. The next stage is how you deal with the stuff which is, after all you have done, is still untagged, something that you do not know how to attribute it. The way to do that is to define a rule on uncategorized resources. That's what you say, okay, this service that I'm not sure what it is should be allocated proportional to Azure VMs, for example, or AWS VMs, or whatever service you decide. Then you kind of define a rule how I am dealing with the uncategorized, something that I was not able to pinpoint. I typically spread it across all the spend, and everybody needs to take his own share, or you define it as a separate budget.
How many of you guys have Express Route? Who pays for the Express Route? The people who use it or the central guys, right? So this is a way to basically take the costs that are coming in against that central subscription that the network team owns and start saying, hey, I can take that cost and now I can start spreading it out across the actual application team. So when they see their costs of that network cost as well as their direct resource costs.
ExpressRoute is a great example. The support is another one. Who pays for support? The last step is still does not exist in Azure. It will be in the very near future. Is how you deal with reserved instances. Who doesn't know what reserved instance is?
Excellent.
Most people do know. We'll show a bit later what exactly does it mean. It's the new feature coming into Azure. It exists in other clouds. And the idea is that you make a pre-committed payment, and then you get a discount on the usage, right? So the way the reserved instances are handled, typically for most efficiency, you make the reservations at the enrollment level. And then you need to allocate the benefits of the reservations to whoever paid for them, which typically are the business units. So the cost allocation allows you to say, okay, pick a specific purchase of reserved instance, and then I would like this purchase to allocate to, let's say, my production, the workload type, my production, right? Or I would like to allocate it to a specific business unit, or I would like to allocate it to another purpose. That way you kind of split the benefits of the reserved instance to whoever actually paid for them. Then you summarize, and the result of all this process is the report that you have seen previously, the cost allocation report, which may be used for chargeback or for visibility by the teams, or as the source of the cost of the RBAC entities, right? Now, we mentioned that in the ideal world, all resources are properly tagged. At least in our company, this is not ideal world, and not all resources are tagged. And this is the example, I will zoom in a second, of different fixes that we can make to the tagging policies. So here's the workload type that we have seen previously, and I'm showing how it is defined. So I'm saying that I would like to create a new tag by the name of workload type, and the keys I'm using are stack. This is what it is called in cloud provider. And then there are all types of rules. When the value of that has either POC or ops, this is the workload type of DevOps. If it contains dev in any way, somebody called it dev, somebody called it development, I'm calling it R&D, and so on. This is the way to normalize the tagging across your organization. And finally, we're getting to the budgets, something that Robert has mentioned as extremely important, and I think everybody understands that. There are several ways to look at the budget. Here, the budget is defined. This is the monthly budget, how each month I'm doing against the budget, and unsurprisingly, the cost is higher than the budget. The other view that you can have, instead of having the monthly tracking in the presentation, you can change the accumulated budget. So this is the total budget for the time range I'm looking at from the beginning of the year. And this is the accumulated cost as it grows and finally crosses the budget.
So remember when we were talking about annual budgets and being able to break them up into a monthly view? That's what the purple bars were. And then you're seeing your actual spend against those monthlies. And this might be a manager view where you're looking at that monthly, but like a developer could be inside the month and getting alerts. I guess we're going to talk about alerts soon.
We'll show that in a second, yes.
Yeah.
The way to define budgets, again, there is this entity tree that you have seen in the past. And you can define budget on each entity separately. And then you can define budget at the top level. As Robert mentioned, there is an option to export that into an Excel. Then you have a template. The finance fills it in, and you re-import it into the product. The budgets on the entities do not have to be accumulated to the budget at the top level. You may have higher budget, and you may still allocate lower budgets in sum to the entities, so you have some buffer. And again, each budget report can become an alert as we have shown. There is also a specific set of alerts in the My Tools alert management. And the very first one is the projected cost against the threshold, where you can define, okay, not when my cost crosses the threshold, but when the projection, monthly projection of my cost crosses the threshold, and we put the budget here, I would like to get an alert. So at the 10th of the month, you can actually know that you're going to cross your budget, and then you can take an action immediately.
Beg for more. So now we have visibility, we have it distributed out, we even have email notifications and reports and all these things that are helping people understand what is their budget, their envelope of cost, that's acceptable? Where are they in actual spend versus that budget? Now the question is, well, how do you actually reduce costs? How do you stay under budget, right? Well, cost is the difference between success and, or a difference. There's plenty of ways to fail. But cost is a difference between success and failure in the cloud.
How many in the audience represent some kind of SaaS products? Quite a few. So for SaaS, the higher COGS is the difference between profitability and the loss.
Yeah.
It's extremely important. And
yeah. Well, it's a major operational metric. We've talked about that before. It's also an early indicator of anomalies. Like if cost is all of a sudden runaway, what's going on? Did we have an automation job in the DevOps pipeline that all of a sudden went wrong and started spinning up a whole bunch of instances that we didn't need? Or did it stop cleaning up the instances that it should have? Like those are ways, it's another kind of global way to see what's going on and be able to see when things are out of what is expected. The simple visual here is trying to get to, well, optimization, right? So this workload, the application workload, will run perfectly well in all three of those VM SKUs, right? And which one will the developer naturally choose?
yeah, well, the smallest one, of course, right?
No, no.
No?
No, they'll choose VM1 because VM1 means that they don't have to worry about performance later. Because if the workload gets really stressed, well, there's lots of buffer around that workload right now. So if it scales up inside the VM, he doesn't have to come back and think about that. It's just done. This is what we've done for decades in the data center. This is called provisioning for peak, right? I buy a $15,000, $250,000 piece of hardware because someday I might need that, right? Antithesis of cloud, just, right? The idea with cloud is you buy what you need, you pay for what you use, right? And so which of these models is going to deliver more success to the business, right? That's VM3. It's going to deliver the same business output for a lower cost, right? Which one is going to make managers in finance want to accelerate and put more projects into the cloud, right? If the goal of the CIO is get our projects into the cloud, well, if people think there's a whole bunch of money being wasted as you do that, they're going to be resistant to it, right? So how do we show people, that we are optimized and we are efficient in how we're using the cloud dollar? And how do we maximize the number of business problems can be solved with the same cloud dollar, right? And that's really about optimization. And it's not a one-time thing, although what we see typically is there's a really big impact when people first start using these tools, or I'll say a really big visible impact. Because typically, things are not running very efficiently, hate to tell you. There's all kinds of waste that you'll find when you start using the tool, and teams will start working on that. And so what happens is this inefficiency pretty quickly comes out of the system. First kind of 3 to 6 months of using a cost management solution. Now, what happens after that is actually we see that the growth rate of resources and in the cloud actually accelerates, right? Now, at that point, the find inefficiencies, fix them, and optimize them is a much smaller loop. So you don't see the big waste, But what you do see is confidence grow in our ability to put things into the cloud and know that they're going to be done efficiently. Because at that point, you do have teams that are paying attention to cost and continuous optimization. And continuous optimization is required. That's how you stay efficient. Because the moment you take your eye off the ball, waste will creep in. It's just, there's lots of different moving parts. There's new clouds, there's new resources, there's new projects, new teams that aren't kind of fully onboarded. There's all kinds of ways to waste money.
And sometimes customers are asking us, now you are a cloud provider. You actually get your revenue from us paying for the waste. Why would you care for the optimization? Why does a cloud provider care for the optimization?
Because of the last part. When you guys feel more confident that you're not wasting money in our cloud and you're getting the business value out of it, every customer that we've talked to that gets into that state uses more cloud because they are actually realizing the optimized benefit of using it for their business, right? That's why we care. That's why Corey cares. Like, the first thing I'm going to do for Corey Sanders, if you guys don't know him, is the lead for compute, so VMs. So the first thing we're going to come in and tell his customer is, wow, could you save a lot of money by changing your SKUs, right? But why does he care? He cares because he knows that building that trust with you guys and giving you the visibility and the controls so that you can get the most out of the cloud is what will give you the confidence to use more of it. So there are two primary ways to optimize things. One is at a resource level. Now, this can have impact, don't get me wrong, like those D14s. Leave a few D14s just running for a while, and it adds up to the thousands pretty quickly. That's one resource or 10 resources. But that's really where the application teams, when they think about optimization, that's where they can have the most impact. Because they're the ones choosing the SKUs when they do the deployments. They're the ones making those choices daily. They can re-architect to say, instead of a smaller number of big things, I want a larger number of small things, right? That auto scales so that it's more cost efficient. The other thing is cost optimization kind of through purchase models. And so this is where reserved instances and hybrid use rights and things like that can help optimize cost. Now, these are typically done by central teams because they're in aggregate. Being an optimization that happens in aggregate, they can have a much higher impact on the efficiency and the cost of the system. Because when you do one of these, you can affect thousands of VMs, the cost of 1,000 VMs in one change, as opposed to the cost of 10 VMs in a change. So we will jump to demo.
We have 2 minutes. We have 10 minutes, so
yep.
I will try to be very, very quick about it. The first step into optimization, as usual, is visibility. This is an example of the visibility of utilization of the system. This is the CPU of the VMs.
Maybe zoom in on that.
Yeah, I will. This is the utilization of VMs, specifically how many VMs we're running every day. And I have split them into buckets of 0 to 20% CPU, 20 to 40, and so on. You have 5 buckets total. This is a very typical view. You see at the bottom, most of the VMs are not even spiking. But I've chosen maximum CPU as a metric here. I could choose other metrics to present it. But all these VMs never spike above 20% CPU, never even spike. Then in the middle, you have few bands which are much more narrow, and then at the top are running machines which spike constantly. By the way, when you look at average and not maximum, you will see a very different kind of picture. Looks like the system doesn't like the zooming. So I just selected the average CPU, And this is a very typical view that we see in the companies. Most machines, on average, are way below 20%. So in most enterprises, there is a huge over-provisioning.
And by the way, this is a huge improvement, right? Remember, average utilization in the data center on-premise is single digits.
7%.
So we should all give ourselves thumbs up. We got to double that, triple that in the cloud, right? But there's a lot of opportunity left for optimization here. And giving you guys visibility to that, and then giving your dev teams visibility so that they can, and your ops teams visibility so that they can actually change things is a key component.
So there is a metric explorer in the cost management which can show you the specific performance of each one of the VMs. If you remember, when we were showing the spike, we have shown a VM of type DS15. Looks like.
You resumed again.
Yeah, I zoomed, but the system doesn't like the zoom. Anyway, this is an example of one of these VMs. You see when exactly the load test was run, as opposed to the total time that the machine was running. The actual load test was running maybe for 2 hours, but the developers forgot the machine for almost 24. This is also a typical example of the uncontrolled costs. But you see that here this specific machine was running load test at this percentage of CPU. Probably the memory is higher. And you can also see the memory.
By the way, we call this the prove it.
And
because when you give a developer a tool and you say, hey, you're wasting money, he's like, prove it.
Here's the proof. We
Here
see exactly when the load test was run.
That VM, we know when you ran your load test and you left that expensive VM just sitting there running and you're not using it at all. Is that enough proof? Okay, then shut it off or downsize it so that it's appropriate to the value that we're getting out of it.
And finally, in the sizing, the tool itself, the management tool itself, analyzes what you're using and gives you the recommendations. So here's an example. There is standard A1, which should be moved to standard A0, and there is a justification similar to what we have seen before. All the information about the VM, the CPU utilization, and so on. Then you can, if there is more than one candidate, you can zoom into specific candidates. These are actionable recommendations that you can actually export or send to somebody and say, okay, please do. The last thing on optimization that I wanted to show is the way the cost optimization will behave. This is not yet available in Azure. It will be in November.
Yeah, you guys saw that reserved instances for Azure were announced this week. They're coming later this quarter, and we will support optimization of those and reporting on those as they come out. And if any of you guys are early adopters of that, we'd love to talk to you because we need to test our code too.
So suppose your VM, or it's a group of VMs, is running 24/7 all the time, 100% runtime. This is the one-time payment you are making. This is the pay-as-you-go cost. At about 6 months, or in this case, at about 5 months, you will have the break-even point. And from that moment on, it's pure saving. That's the idea of the reserved instance. Now, not for all VM types, it's this saving. It's an example. For every region and every type of VM, you have a different kind of chart, a different type of break-even. So this is a what-if scenario of how it will behave. What happens if the VM is not running 24/7? What happens if it's running, let's say, just 60% of the time? So it still makes sense to reserve in this case, but the break-even point is at 8 months and not at 5, right? And when the reserved instances become available, same as with the sizing recommendations, you will have the RI buying recommendations, right, which will tell you exactly what to buy and what not to buy.
So I'm going to try to wrap up pretty quick here, give you guys a chance to ask us some questions. Forrester's done a study of one of our customers that's a large US software company. Over 3 years, they saw an ROI of 286% on the tool. And that was before we changed the pricing. So I guess if it's going to be free for you guys for Azure, that'll have infinite ROI.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So roadmap. And this is what we're committed to now. We continuously take feedback from our active customers and work that into the roadmap. But these are the things from an integration standpoint were kind of our top critical things. This is all the stuff we are announcing this week. The easy access from the Azure portals, that's also will show up in the enterprise portal for enterprise enrollment admins. It'll show up there in a week or two. We weren't able to get that in by Ignite. The Azure portal access is there today. And so both of those will, once you're set up, will have direct click through for any user in that context over into Cloudyn. Managing Azure spend for free, so zero cost for that. And then full support for EA customers, CSP partners, and Azure Direct customers. And then we continue to support AWS and Google Clouds as well. Right now, the big commitment that we have in Q4, because we've got to get going on a lot of other stuff for the next milestone, is making sure that as Azure RIs come on board, that we support them. First half of next year, there'll be a permanently free tier. So what you're getting now is the free tier plus some of the premium capabilities that we'll have. And that'll move right into this free tier. And we've marked on the pricing page which are the features that will eventually become premium even on Azure. We will become an Azure billable service. So today, Cloudyn is a separate entity, a Microsoft entity, but it's a separate entity with its own contracts. By middle of next year, it'll just be another meter in your Azure enrollment or your CSP program. Then there is integration with other services. So you might have noticed we talked about recommendations. If you're familiar with Azure Advisor, Azure Advisor already provides a lot of recommendations that are similar. We will be integrating those so that you get the best of both worlds. So that's kind of the first one that we'll be working on. Automation. So right now, the notifications that can happen is to a human being. And he swears he agrees with me on this, but at some point, like even the human beings, we need get that. It should be a report, hey, it's a notification, and oh, by the way, the system took care of it for you. Right? We analyzed, hey, why did you wait until I read that email about $250,000 of annual savings for my RI? Why didn't you just go commit a new RI for me and save me $250,000? Of course, the humans have to we have to get to trust before we really want to do that. But we're going to start integrating with Azure Automation and have more generic automation integrations so that you can use your other automation tools as well. But to be able to start taking action. So whenever VMs are in my dev test environment and are underutilized and oversized continually, go through my dev test environments and just automatically downsize them. Right? The RI repurchase. Policy management. So right now you have to go over to the policy system or to write ARM JSON files to set tags and policy. We'll bring that into our experience so the people who are managing costs can set the cost-related and have visibility to the cost-related tags that are already set in policies. Our goal, why is Microsoft in this business? To guarantee that you have the best cost management solution for Azure and you continue to have a great cross-cloud cost management solution because that's your enterprise need. There are other cross-cloud cost management vendors. Some of them are here on the floor, good friends. Our job is to be the best for Azure. And so that's what we're going to do as we go forward. We're going to make sure we're the best for Azure, and we're going to continue to deliver on the customer-driven requirements for AWS and Google. You can see this on the pricing page. I won't spend a lot of time on it because I think we're running short.
Yeah, have 15
But the
seconds for it.
highlighted red things are the things that will become premium. We've also lowered the price for managing cross-cloud, other clouds to 1% list. Getting started. So easiest place to start for an Azure customer or partner is from the Azure portal. You'll see trial.cloudyn.com links. That'll take you to the Cloudyn page. It says if you're an Azure customer, click here to get an optimized experience. You should. We spent the last 2 months making sure that there's a really simple optimized experience for Azure customers and partners to onboard. And that starts from that cost management plus billing cost management blade. You'll also see banners on Advisor and other places where costs show up in the Azure portal that if you click there, it'll take you there and link you off. For EA customers, either the enrollment admin or somebody with the admin with the enrollment level API key for Enterprise Portal is needed to set up Cloudyn. For CSP partners, it needs to be somebody that has the application ID, the commerce ID, and the application secret key from the partner center. So basically one of your CSP admins. For direct customers, you just need your account, your user account and ID with the appropriate user access or above. So owner, user access admin, access to the subscriptions. There's that trial.cloudyn.com product page, and I think we're out. Please give us feedback. We'd love to hear if we were worthy of your time on a Thursday morning. But we appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
And we didn't see too many yawns.